Good news, everyone! I'm reviewing a movie you probably haven't seen, it's not about superheroes, and I have way too much to say about it.
Ba 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 da 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 ba 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 da 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 ba 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 da da da. And he's not afraid.
The following is an in-depth story analysis. If you haven't seen this movie, and a lot of you guys probably haven't, you might want to before listening to this review. But of course, as always, if you've popped in live right now and you've never seen this movie, you're going to hear me spoil it and talk about everything that happens in it. And like I said, I've got a lot of notes. I've got a lot to say about this one, so strap in. Welcome back, everybody, to what is usually the Superhero Rewind Unscripted podcast. Today, it's a special requested rewind, pardon me, this one by Jeffrey Patron on Patreon from quite a while back, and I want to thank Jeffrey for his request and for his patience on this. I have finally gotten to this, watched it twice this week. It's a movie that was never on my radar, a science fiction movie that's kind of a cult classic that somehow I had never heard of before Jeffrey requested it, and I'm glad that I've seen it now. It's a mixed bag. It's going to be a really interesting thing to try to talk about. I have lots and lots of thoughts, so we'll go ahead and get right into it. As always, thanks for being here. If you're watching live, thanks for watching after the fact. If you're doing that, feel free to leave comments throughout the show, and a little bit later, I'll take a look at those and try to converse with you some after I've gone through a lot of my notes and my thoughts. You can leave a super chat, and that guarantees that I'll talk about whatever aspect of this that you want me to. And I've got so much to do here, I'll probably stop a little bit more frequently than I usually do before we get to the end. Hi, everybody. In the comments there, Daniel Davis says they're just making a TV show on it. Yeah, in fact, the whole first season has already dropped. I watched the pilot. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Speaking of mixed bags, maybe a little less than mixed with that particular thing. But anyway, it's Alex Kurtzman. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So, I like I said, I'd never heard of this before. This is a David Bowie movie, and this is from 1976, and I was just constantly kind of hit by a barrage of interesting factoids and surprises while watching this movie. I didn't realize that Bowie had really acted in very much beyond Labyrinth, and that's a movie that when I was a kid kind of freaked me out, and the puppets and Bowie, and I never really watched it more than a couple times. And David Bowie is a kind of character in history that is real off my radar, and I have not spent enough time with. A real blind spot for me. And after seeing this movie and listening to a little bit of his music, particularly a track that one of our viewers says was maybe supposed to be used for this movie initially, I really need to do that. Really cool, experimental, kind of ethereal rock in the 70s, of course. I'm sure a lot of you guys are way more familiar with David Bowie than I am, and so yeah, Jeffrey always making me kind of spread my wings, get outside of my comfort zone. But anyway, I was surprised by that. I was surprised that this was directed by Nicolas Roeg, who I saw the movie before I even realized who that was, because I'd forgotten his name. But he directed another kind of obscure 70s movie that I reviewed by request years ago, back when I called the not superhero version of this show Rewind United. And that's a movie from 1973 called Don't Look Now, which I like more than this, but this is a way more ambitious project than that. And actually, this movie happens because of that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in some background information. This movie also stars Rip Torn, who's an actor that I've only really seen in the Men in Black movies, maybe one or two other things, and this was really early for him, for me, and I expected to see a super young Rip Torn, but I'm like, he's already looking kind of middle-aged by this. Maybe, I say that, maybe like early 40s. But what's really crazy, not to get too ahead of myself, is all of our characters except for David Bowie age kind of gradually throughout this movie. And when we get to the end, Rip Torn starts to, with his old man makeup, look quite a bit like he does in his later years in real life. It's eerie. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give you a synopsis for this movie, which I don't always do because I kind of suspect that most people listening, since I'm going real fine-tooth comb and real in-depth on these podcasts, has probably seen the movie, but especially if you've never seen it or if it's been a while, I'm going to give you a rundown of the plot, but I also want to do this to prove how relatively simple this story is versus how insanely complicated and kind of cryptic the execution is. So here's what happens in The Man Who Fell to Earth, which it sounds like kind of a 50s sci-fi B-movie title, which is one of the things I like about it, and it also is very, very thematically relevant, and it took me a couple of viewings before I really realized what the title meant, and honestly, it took me, I had the same thing I did with Lone Ranger last week. It took me a second viewing before I picked up on a lot of stuff this movie's doing, except unlike Lone Ranger, I feel like I'm still missing stuff, and I need probably a third or a fifth or an 18th viewing. I don't know if I like this movie well enough to do that, but anyway, here is what happens in this movie. So David Bowie plays a humanoid alien who comes down to Earth hoping to transport water back to his planet because it's suffering from a terrible drought and his people are dying. He uses advanced technology to create a bunch of patents and start a company and raise a fortune for his mission. The company is called World Enterprises, and eventually he builds a spaceship that he'll use just to test interplanetary travel, I guess hoping to eventually complete his goal. I guess he can't use the original spaceship that he came in because it crashed in water. I don't know if it flooded or what, but we never see that again, so I guess he's got to start from scratch now. A lot of the sci-fi movies with kind of fish out of water, a stranger in a strange land, with the alien that comes to Earth either on purpose or crashes and is stranded here and has to work with whatever he can find on Earth and what's the word? Uses ingenuity and resourcefulness. So anyway, he's trying to figure out a way to get back to his planet and bring water there to save his family. And I guess his planet, I'm not sure. We never see anybody else in the flashbacks from his planet but his family. As far as I know, they're the only survivors. There's really no way to know. But along the way, he's overwhelmed by human vice and cruelty and succumbs to sex and alcohol addiction. He is nearly destroyed by the people and culture he hopes can save his planet, both externally and internally, as he slowly loses his own humanity, or his own equivalent, while struggling to understand what we human beings are all about. He is kidnapped and experimented on by the government toward the end before he can make his space flight, and a non-consensual X-ray fuses his contact lenses, which help disguise his alien appearances to his eyes, thereby forcing him to look like us permanently and forever, altering his own self-identity. The government ultimately abandons their experiments and he wanders back into the world, seemingly ageless, while his former lover and friend have deteriorated naturally. He makes a vinyl record because he looks just like David Bowie and has no other way to express himself, with a message he hopes his family will one day see. Spoilers, unbeknownst to him, as far as I can tell, they're dead already. At least, that's what I think this movie is saying, with one shot that I did not pick up on the first time I saw it. Anyway, and he has a kind of backhanded glimmer of hope at the end that eventually his planet can be saved and maybe humanity will grow up a little and appreciate how good it has it, but he still wallows in depression and ends the film passed out drunk. This is a really kind of bleak movie. I've been using this phrase a lot lately. I think this movie has kind of an earned cynicism. It is definitely about the ways in which humanity can easily lose itself, and it kind of asks the question as to whether human beings are inherently good. So the human condition question is is our capacity to reason over our animal instinct ultimately not our greatest asset, but our Achilles heel? Or if it is our greatest asset, maybe it's also our greatest detriment and the thing that will be our downfall. All good science fiction movies have a what-if statement, and this one is, what if a man from space showed up on Earth during the 1970s to save his people and then had a last temptation of Christ with all the major vices of that period, and then lost to him? So like I said, it's a pretty simple story. Maybe the way I described it, it doesn't sound as simple as it is, because I went off the script a little bit there and probably shouldn't have, but I always run away with myself with these. I'll start looking at my scripted portions and go, but there's these other things that are coming to my head that I want to say right now. This is one of those movies that is kind of like a David Lynch thing, or like some Stanley Kubrick movies, where it is arguably more about mood and how it makes you feel, and certainly about particular themes and ideas that it wants you to kind of pontificate on, before it's about internal logic and full-on suspending disbelief. Although on a second viewing, I think it's a little bit less that way than I gave it credit for in the first place. It's not Eraserhead, but it does remind me a little bit of something like that. I think it's a little bit closer to something like The Shining, which is certainly more straightforward, at least in its setup and in the relatively more realistic world that it's creating and situation, than something like in Eraserhead, or maybe even some other David Lynch movies, what is that movie? I can't think of it right now. I've seen a couple of the more kind of cryptic David Lynch movies. Blue Velvet, that's the movie. Anyway, it is hard to know, at least on a first viewing, how much of this you're supposed to take literally. Again, on a second viewing, I felt like I was understanding much better what the actual literal story was. But there are still quite a few things in the third act that I have questions about, and I have a question section, and as I usually do now, and I'm going to get to that at the end. And some of the things I have questions about are things that I don't know that there are answers to, and there are others that I imagine any of you guys that know this movie a lot better than I do, and especially if you're a fan of this and you've combed it quite a bit, might even be able to answer based on what's really in the movie. But this is one of those things where you're supposed to noodle the ideas, not necessarily question the details as much, even though I'm going to. That's a thing that Roger Ebert complained about some in his review. He originally gave this a 2.5, and really, and of course, I used the same system that he did, but 2.5 stars out of 4. And he complained that, it's got a lot of really interesting, thought-provoking ideas, and it's a really well shot movie, but it doesn't totally come together at the end, and we'll talk about this later, but there's also some stuff that's missing, and it doesn't really feel like a complete piece, so that kind of holds it back as well. But there are some things that he said the same thing, that you're not supposed to really question the details. You're not supposed to look too much about what's really happening in the movie. And some of the things that he had questions about, but was like, I don't think the movie really wants me to ask these questions, on a second viewing, I was able to maybe answer some. So I don't know if it's as much that way as he thought it was, or even as I did initially. But it is arguably still kind of a problem if you watch a movie like this on just one viewing and you're kind of clueless at the end, and it's so cryptic and it's not explicit enough about things that are about what's really happening and what its character motivations are and that kind of thing, the stuff that you don't want to be too vague in a story. But rules are made to be broken, and not every piece of art is playing by the same rules or trying to accomplish the same things. And I think on another viewing, I was able, just like Lone Ranger last week, I had kind of a different experience with this as I started combing through it. But it's maybe a bit of a problem that I had to take notes and write a lot before I really appreciated a lot of what was happening with this. And that's kind of the point I was trying to make, is if you watch this on one viewing and you end it out and you feel totally clueless and you're not won over by just the visuals and just how it's making you feel and kind of the overarching, broad idea of the movie, then it's gonna lose you, and that's unfortunate. That's a shame, because it does have a lot of really interesting things to say and things to get you to kind of mull over. So it reminds me a little bit of a couple different kinds of science fiction movies, like The Day the Earth Stood Still, but a less hopeful version of that. And it's kind of, I don't want to say the opposite, but a little bit backwards from that, where it's not about an alien that comes here and is trying to help us save ourselves because of the mistakes that his own planet has made. He's just looking to us for help in the first place, and comes here and doesn't find humanity. He finds people, but he doesn't find humanity. And Day the Earth Stood Still is, there's still time, there's still hope. Your compassion and it can win out, and you can be enlightened and make the right choice. And this movie, that question is very much up in the air. And there's a place toward the end where I found myself thinking that the movie is saying that there is no hope. We got nothing. And then you get to the end of the movie, and there's a little glimmer in the last little line or speech that Bowie has. But Day the Earth Still is in there. It's kind of like something like E.T. Of course, the next two movies I'm going to mention came after it, but it's a little bit like, not too far after it though, with E.T. It's a little bit like that, in that an alien comes to Earth and he comes in peace, and what is the first thing we do? We grab him and try to experiment on him, and that happens with this movie as well. And then it also reminds me of a movie I haven't seen in a really long time from the mid-90s called K-Pax. So there's lots of course, different, like, humanoid comes to Earth, either in a disguise or not, kinds of movies, sometimes played for comedy. Again, the fish out of water thing, where it's kind of more about the kind of sitcom ideas, where it's like, what would happen if an alien came down and didn't know how to use a fork? Ha 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 ha. Kind of the Alf kind of thing, or Third Rock from the Sun. And that's a little bit more the direction that Kurtzman's series is going, even though he's trying to emulate this. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. It's a movie that right now, after two viewings, I respect a lot, but I don't think I love. I appreciate that it's an artist's unadulterated vision, and it's the kind of thing that you couldn't make in the mainstream even 15 or 20 years later. Roger Ebert apparently did another review years later, like I think in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, where he bumped it up to a 3 out of 4 stars and said, it's an extra 0.5 because you can't even make a thing like this now, and I don't like that. But I do think it's a little too experimental to effectively tell its story or get its point across. There's a lot of ideas and themes that it drops and certainly does explore, but at the end of the day, some of it I'm not totally sure that it's cohesive and comes together, or what it's really after and trying to say with some things. The major broad theme of that I mentioned earlier, that humanity maybe has a chance at being enlightened and doing the right thing, but there's a lot of contradictions in the human condition, and we've kind of proven over and over again that the thing that separates us from the animals also ends up making us act like animals, and that definitely comes through, and we'll talk about that quite a bit. And like I said, even though this was an unadulterated vision, it still feels compromised because there's scenes missing. It's an incomplete movie. It apparently has a 20-minute longer version that came out in the UK or in Europe at large, I'm not sure. And I don't know if that's gettable. Like, if you buy the European version of this movie, I don't know if you get this cut or if you get that. I haven't looked deeply into that, but this is a movie that is really difficult to get your hands on right now. For the 40th anniversary a few years ago, again, pretty old movie, it's 76. Criterion put out a disc or a double disc, I'm not sure, with a really nice cover because their stuff always looks good. And I guess they didn't print too many of them because that's a really expensive disc to get your hands on now. It's like, at least $100, if not a couple $100, anywhere you find it right now online. And there's some other regions versions that you can get if you have a way to play it. The way I had to watch it was through an Amazon rental, and the aspect ratio was kind of off. It was like the frame was scrunched some, and I hated having to watch it that way, but it was the only way I could look at it. So I'm sure visually I would have appreciated it more if I'd been able to see, a pristine format version of it the way it was intended, but at least I was able to look at it. And at least it wasn't like horribly grainy or anything. Like, it looked like it was from a good print, but for some reason it was scrunched a little bit. Like I said, it's definitely a movie that requires multiple viewings. At first, I thought a lot of scenes were just random things happening with no rhyme or reason, and then on a second viewing, I caught a lot more. It was a little bit like, I always go to this, but it was a little bit like what I had when I reviewed Fight Club all those years ago. A lot more lines in dialogue either set up things to come or have a way deeper subtext than I realized. Like, I thought that there were a lot of scenes that just weren't really doing anything, weren't revealing anything, and I'm wrong about that. I don't always know what they're revealing, but it became clear as it went along that it was way more nuanced than I thought, and it wasn't just arbitrary, and it was just, random things being thrown on the screen. And I kind of want to go back and compare this at some point to Don't Look Now, because they're made in somewhat similar ways. That's just a much simpler story that, again, is not a sci-fi thing, doesn't have this kind of ambition, and isn't based on a classic science fiction novel, which I'm kind of curious to read now. So the biggest thing that made it difficult for me to appreciate this, at least on a first viewing, was how distant we are from the protagonist and from the world. It kind of does both, and I needed to do one or the other. And once I knew where everything was going, it was easier to appreciate that choice. And I respect it. I think I get why it's doing that. I also think the very same story could have been told in a different way that would make it easier to pull an audience member through with it the first time around. So, through Newton's eyes, that's David Bowie's character, the world is supposed to look alien to us. The problem is that I feel like everything I'm looking at is alien. The main character and the world. And so I'm struggling to connect with anything until we finally reveal that Newton is in fact an alien, and it's pretty clear from the title that that's what it's going to be. I'm gonna say this a lot. On a first viewing, I wasn't 100% sure if it was supposed to be a reveal or not. If we were supposed to kind of wonder if there was something else going on despite that title. And it felt like it was played a little bit as a reveal when we finally see Newton's real alien face. There's a lot more clues than I realized early on once I could get my head around what things were supposed to be actually real, and because there's a lot of the kind of visions early on that just seem to be kind of surreal imagery. And Roger Ebert talked about metaphysics with this movie. And on a second viewing, I'm not really seeing that. Maybe existential stuff as far as the human condition goes, but metaphysics? Is this really about the nature of reality? I don't know that it is. I don't know that it's about, like, because it feels like a drug trip movie. It feels like a movie that's about a character that isn't sure what is real and what isn't, and is kind of escaping into drugs, or in this case alcohol, but alcohol kind of affects him like a hallucinogen might, a human being. But all it does, and I'll talk about this later, but all it does is take him back to his own planet again. It kind of brings him to reality in a weird way, and we discover that there's not really as much. It feels surrealistic, but a lot of the things that play that way are actually real things. I mean, there's some weird symbolism and stuff here and there, but most of the actual scenes and flashbacks and things that you see turn out to be the things that actually happen. And so once I realized that, all of that plays a little bit better. But and like I said, then I'm thinking, okay, like with all the shots of his planet and his family and stuff, I realize, okay, maybe it's not supposed to be revealed that he's an alien. Maybe it's just a reveal of what he actually looks like we've been waiting for it the whole time. So it isn't, oh, is he an alien? It's, is that what he looks like, though? Like, is he totally humanoid, or is he wearing some sort of a disguise? And it's certainly a reveal for his girlfriend in that moment. And I think it's supposed to be, I think the idea is when you get to that point, everything that he's been experiencing in seeing Earth for the first time is supposed to feel weirder than what you're seeing when you see his real visage and his real body. So it's like you're a fly on the wall and you're trying to figure out this weird alien seeming guy, and then you realize that it's in fact the world that's alienating, and he's actually sympathetic and relatable to some degree, even though he comes from this other planet. But it still remains kind of strange and off-putting, again, at least the first time I see it, because the whole thing feels cryptic. So, and there's a lot of movies that I like a lot better on a second viewing, and that I realize, okay, that's what that's what you were trying to do, but I feel like it could have grabbed me in the first place better than it does, and I'm still not 100% sure about some of the stuff going on in that last act. I'll talk about this later. It is a thing that I thought was kind of all over the place as far as narrative structure, and it really is in 3 acts, which I was surprised to realize looking at it again. I appreciate that it isn't holding my hand and feeding me clues I can work out, but there's so much ethereal, surreal imagery, like I said, that I'm just struggling to feel much besides disorientation on a first viewing, and I don't think that's all I'm supposed to be feeling. I think more contrast with Newton's life on his home planet would help, and maybe even opening from the very beginning on his planet. There's really no reason, I don't think, not to just let the viewer see that world from the beginning. And it might look surreal and cryptic in the first place too. I'm not sure how exactly it would play, but considering that it opens with this thing that might be a spaceship coming through, because you can't really see it very well, coming through the atmosphere and then crashing in water, and then boom, you see him walking around. I'm not sure if any time has passed between those things, or if that's the first time he's walking around. It's really hard to tell, but I'm not sure the movie couldn't tell the same story it's telling more effectively by just opening with there's Newton in his, maybe from a distance, so you can't tell exactly what he looks like. Because we do that throughout the movie anyway, even before the big reveal. So you just, see him with his family and their kind of water packs and tubes on their, desert drought planet. And then you go, oh, okay, he's an alien. And then he comes to Earth, and then we treat it like he's the eyes in a world that we're not familiar with, even though we are, so that we can kind of get in his head and see everything from his perspective. Personally, that's kind of what I wish it had done. Like I said, it's missing 20 minutes, which probably explains some of the weird time jumps and sudden mood swings from characters, like when Newton goes crazy with the TVs and he's being mean to Mary Lou for what seems like no reason in that moment. And then there's also characters that, one in particular, who gets dropped in all of a sudden and seems like there's a scene missing where maybe we've seen him before, but I'm not totally sure. And there's also kind of some leaps in logic that are probably explained with some of that extra footage, but hard to tell without getting to see that, of course. Sometimes it seems over my head, and I can't decide if it's brilliant or if I'm dense or if it's being kind of self-indulgent and not giving me enough as a viewer. But it just seems like it's not entirely ambiguous, and way less ambiguous, again, than something like Eraserhead, but it seems unnecessarily messy and not cohesive for not enough of a reason, unless it's entirely on purpose. Because after a second viewing, you can tell some of these notes are things that I was writing while I was watching it a second time. So I'm going back on a little bit of it. I have this crazy theory that I'll get to in a little bit, based on what it has to say about television, where the flaws might be intentional, and the fact that I'm picking up on them might mean that I'm looking at the movie correctly, which could be giving it too much credit, and is also a thing I'm not sure how I feel about, but we'll get there. A little bit of background real quick. So apparently David Bowie, according to himself in interviews, and this goes counter apparently to some other people in the production, but he says, said years ago in an interview, of course he's sadly passed away, that he was on cocaine the entire shoot and didn't have to act at all. That he could not relate more to his character because he, quote, wasn't of this earth at that time, and it came totally naturally to him. And I'm sure obviously not that it's good that he was on cocaine and he had a horrible, rough time of it, but like a lot of those guys, some really wonderful art also came out of it, and it seems that this is kind of one of those. It's really sad he was going through all of that, but it does work to the service, to the benefit of the movie. I think his performance, besides some of the really thoughtful, thought-provoking ideas that I'll talk about a little bit later, his performance is absolutely the best thing about this movie. I think he's great, and it was his first major movie role. Apparently his kind of drug trip reflecting the situation elevated the whole thing. One of the most unfortunate things about this movie is that Bowie didn't do the soundtrack himself, and none of his music is in it. Apparently there was some kind of a contract issue, and he wasn't able to use his own music. And one of our viewers suggested that, and I couldn't find any information on this right before I started shooting, but one of our viewers suggested that one of his albums, Low, was actually written as the soundtrack for this, and then he couldn't use it. And I listened to some of that, and is that the name of just that song? No, that's the name of the album. And then the song I listened to was Subterraneans, which would have been the perfect theme for this movie. And I really wish that that had been the soundtrack, because the score is all over the place. It uses a lot of incidental music. It doesn't really come together to sound like anything. With what it has to say about media, I think that might be intentional, but I also think that for the piece, for the thing as a piece of art, and the fact that it's David Bowie of all people playing the alien, it really should have been his music, and it would be really nice if at some point if there are still any rights disputes or anything, it would be really cool if somehow there could be a release using his music, and specifically from that album, and maybe even add in those 20 minutes back, and that could be the perfect cut, depending on what's actually in those 20 minutes, because I've not seen them. So I alluded to this earlier, but Roeg, the director, got to make this movie because he got $1.5 million after making Don't Look Now. Again, a wonderful, understated horror movie that makes you never want to go to the city of Venice. It just makes this really romantic city seem like the most terrifying place to go. And Anyway, so Paramount wanted the U.S. rights, paid him $1.5 million, and that's why he was able to make this movie. So we wouldn't have this if it weren't for Don't Look Now. And I also thought it was weird, just a little tidbit, that Roeg considered casting Michael Crichton of all people, yeah, the writer, the Jurassic Park writer, as the alien in Bowie's role, which is really wild, and I don't know if he ever acted in anything or if that would have been his breakout role and then he would have started acting and stuff. But he was also considering Peter O'Toole, and I can't really imagine anybody else playing it besides Bowie. So like I said, this was requested quite a while back, and I felt bad for not getting to it for the longest time, but I'm actually kind of glad that it ultimately worked out this way, because it's weirdly timely, because the new Amazon show is out. Amazon, pardon me. I watched the pilot on Amazon. It's a Showtime show, and I guess actually aired on Showtime. Nobody watched it. The ratings were terrible, and I doubt it gets another season after that. And I don't know if it was supposed to get another season or if it's just a miniseries, because I only watched the first episode, and I don't really have a lot of interest in watching more. I will say it's ironic, right, considering the source material, that it seems a little bit more lucid than Picard. Again, it's Alex Kurtzman directing several episodes, including the pilot. I don't know if he even directed much before that. He directs that. It looks like everything else that he's got his name on. And he wrote or co-wrote several episodes of that. And I wouldn't have touched it with a 10-foot pole, considering my history with stuff that he's written, if it weren't for this movie. But I was curious, because I figured people would, the like 3 people that will care about this review would. No, we have a few people watching right now, and thanks so much for doing that. But I'm just making a joke, because this is somewhat obscure, and I had never heard of it before, so I didn't know how much interest there would be in this. But anyway, I figured some people would probably ask me about it, and so I did go ahead and watch that first episode. It stars Chiwetel Ejiofor, and I love that actor. He's great. My first exposure to him was as the bad guy in Serenity, the Firefly movie sequel. And he's good in it. He's as good as he can be. He's got some really over-the-top, silly stuff he's got to do, and I kind of see why Kurtzman went there. If it's a reboot, it works better, I guess. But here's the thing. I thought this thing was, like, why in the world would you do a sequel to this 45 years later? But that's what they did. I assumed that it must have just been a straight up remake in a miniseries or TV series version, and it isn't that. And it's really bizarre that it was greenlit this way, because it's one of those things that irritatingly kind of tries to serve as both things, the whole soft reboot thing, where it's in this continuity and it's in real time, so it's 40 something years after that movie happened, 76, but it also kind of recreates a lot of the same scenes, and it starts in a similar place with this new character. Like, it shouldn't be called The Man Who Fell to Earth. It should be called The Other Man Who Fell to Earth. And it's just really strange that that Showtime would ever greenlight that, given that there's not even a very good way for people to watch the original. I don't know how many people are going to look at this and really know what they're looking at, which is probably why it didn't do very well. But anyway, I don't want to full-on review that. I wrote some notes about it, and I'm trying to decide how much of this I want to read. It's, like I said, more straightforward than this movie, and it's not as much about the surrealistic imagery, but it's weird like this movie, not because it's trying to emulate the feel of this and the kind of 70s experimentation this movie has, but just because, it's an Alex Kurtzman thing, and so that's why it looks like that. So I want to say that it's a match made in heaven because of that, but he doesn't have the right sensibilities for the material, really. Like I said, it's better than some other things that he's done. I don't know. It's still got some of the same kind of Picard and Discovery problems. Where like I said, it's better than his Star Trek shows, but it's still overwritten and themes are spelled out. The acting is over the top sometimes for no reason. People will act horrible to each other in situations I just don't buy for no other reason than we're trying to look realistic and cynical because that's what the world is now, but it'll be really contrived. It doesn't get there naturally, and it's also not consistent with what little lore we had in the original. Like, David Bowie's drinking water a lot. You know why? Because he lived on a drought planet. I don't think it's because his people had to constantly intravenously have water fed into them. Like, yes, it's one of those rebooty things that has to take images and take them way, way, way too far. So in this movie, his family's got like water packs on them and they've got tubes because it's probably insanely humid and there's no place for them to go drink water, and so they've constantly got to, have it available like that. I don't think it's because their species were like fish, because if they were, they'd be dead already, like all of them. But again, there's a possibility that only his family survived, because that's all we see in the movie. In the TV show, there's more people apparently, and like I said, they're kind of establishing stuff that lore and things that weren't in this movie, like this kind of like master what's the word I'm looking for? Protege kind of relationship that apparently everybody has in that culture. I don't know. It gives them a name. I don't think the movie does. But anyway, like, do they have to constantly drink water like Edgar from Men in Black? It gets kind of silly, and Newton in this movie could already speak in complete sentences when we met him, and he was acting relatively normal. Now, I don't know how much time passed, like I said, when he first comes to Earth, so it's possible he has this period where he walks around and has to, like, learn how to speak English, and he's acting really bizarre, and, maybe he also goes to a police station and stuff. I don't know. It was kind of annoying to have to go through all of that with this character after just watching this movie when the movie doesn't do that, and it seems like it's playing it for comedy that isn't really funny. But the other thing is, the theme of the show seems to be, and maybe if I kept watching it would win me over, I don't know, but the theme described in the overwritten, heavy-handed opening is it's about this new guy from that planet finding his humanity. And the original is about Newton losing his humanity and it being humanity's fault. So I don't know if the show missed the point with that, or if it's trying to make a new point so that it's not just doing the same thing that the movie did, but it's doing a lot of other things the movie did. So anyway, I don't know. It's more plot-driven, not as surreal and image-driven, which, if I was going to remake this, I would probably do it in a somewhat more straightforward way, but it's weird in all the wrong ways. Anyway, so I guess I just did a little mini review of that, but I wanted to bring it up in case you were curious. Let's get back into this movie, and let's talk about theme, shall we? So, obviously, one of the biggest things this movie is about is alienation. And it's also about addiction. It's about depression and self-destruction. It's primarily about humanity's tendency to destroy itself in the name of self-preservation. And it's about contradictions in the human condition, of which I'll bring up several. It's about television and media's influence on the culture. If you've seen the movie, you'll remember that Newton comes here because apparently his planet has some way to see TV signals from our planet. I don't know if they have just really impressive satellites or what, but everything he learned about Earth he got from television, and it deals a little bit with the false identity that TV gives society. And remember, of course, this is in the 70s, so now we can extrapolate a lot of this to the internet as well, and that changes things a little bit, but I'm just talking about what this movie's about. False identity it gives society as society emulates the cynical commercial nature of television, and also as individuals fail to live up to the superficial, perfect versions of themselves as are broadcasting commercials and shows, the kind of leave it to beaver effect. There's this great line that Newton has, that Bowie has, where he says the strange thing about television is that it doesn't tell you everything. It shows you everything about life on Earth, but perhaps it's in the nature of television. And then I had this thought. This is where my wacky theory comes in. Is it possible the movie is trying to emulate that idea right there itself? That the movie is showing us everything, but not telling us everything because of the limitation of the medium. So it's like purposefully leaning into the skid, into the things that movies and television don't do as well. So like it's intentionally flawed and leaving out context to make the point that television and maybe movies shouldn't do all your thinking for you. So if you're not thinking, you'll get to the end of this movie and just let it wash over you and appreciate maybe ideas and images and things, but not realize all the stuff that doesn't make sense about it. But if you realize what doesn't work in the movie and you're criticizing it, you're watching it correctly, because that's what we should be doing about things we're seeing on screens. We should be skeptical. And so then, if that were the case, and I don't know if that's intentional or not, but I can see this read. Then none of those mistakes are actually mistakes at all because they're intentional. So, like, is the way the movie is made a meta commentary on screens and television and movies? The movie equivalent of, I was just testing you to see if you were paying attention. It's a wacky idea, and it would be getting away with a multitude of sins if that's what it was, and maybe it's a little bit too much of a cop-out. I think that's an extreme notion, but I thought of it and wrote it down, so I wanted to share. Anyway, so other themes and ideas. Newton's rise and fall parallel the typical rock musicians' rise and fall. And this is a thing that I don't know if a lot of people would have been picking up on at the time, or if you think of it more like 20 years later after, up-teen documentaries about like rock musicians and Hollywood stars and stuff that have the kind of formulaic, and not to belittle anybody's history, but we've seen this over and over and over again in biopics, right? The kind of formula of you get fame and power very quickly, and then you fall in love, and then you bury yourself in some sort of a vice or an addiction, and that wrecks all your goals and dreams. You lose the girl or whoever you fell in love with. You come out okay at the end, but you're never what you were, and maybe you're a little broken and jaded. That's this movie, and it's eerie that it was made with a musician that whole thing happened to, and while it was happening to him. So that's just wild. And again, I don't think that's a thing that the movie is doing intentionally. I don't think it goes to Bowie because he's on drugs, but it goes to Bowie because of some of, I'm sure, his sensibilities that were informed by the substances that he was taking, to be sure. But I don't think it's intending to parallel those real life things. But at some point, a piece of art takes on a life of its own, and I don't care as much about the author anymore, and so that gets really interesting. It's about the inherent weirdness and gross animal nature of human beings. These are the parts of the movie that make me unsettled and a little bit uncomfortable, but it has to do that to drive its point home. So there are a lot of things that would look bizarre and grotesque from an outsider looking in, maybe, if you weren't a human being, but you came to Earth. So here's another contradiction in the human condition: the beauty but also horror of sexual intercourse. And there's a lot of that in this movie. This movie also parallels sex with violence a lot. And then it's about the politics. This movie's about a lot of stuff. It's about the politics and economics of progress. If you introduce too many new ideas too quickly, people don't keep up and lose interest. People have a limited attention span. They're set in their ways. Another contradiction in the human condition: creatures of habit with the capacity to adapt to extreme change, at least when we have to survive. But we won't change fast enough to help another planet, or maybe not even our own, if the crisis doesn't affect us individually directly in a negative way. A lot of stuff, of course, about alcohol and sex, and I feel like drugs are in there in the way alcohol is affecting our protagonist, even though there's not really anybody taking substances beyond alcohol in this. This is one of the most interesting ideas in this movie, I think. People are trying to escape their reality, fed up with their petty problems, while they can't imagine how much worse it could be, like Newton's problems. The idea that we don't know how good we have it. We're not dying of thirst, most of us. Our whole planet, anyway, isn't becoming a desert and isn't a dried out wasteland, and yet you have people that are living their lives as if it's that bad, and just everything's a matter of perspective. If only you knew how good you had it, you wouldn't be living your life that way, maybe. So Newton's nightmare is the substances we might use to escape from our reality only give him visions of his home, of his reality. So he escapes the horror of our world into reality, which means there is no escape for him. He's either seeing the messed up way that humanity is living its their lives, wondering if we have, the capacity to help him. And then when he's not dealing with, and also he's, again, temptation of Christ, he's losing. He falls for vices and, alcohol and sex and things. And I don't think, by the way, the movie is saying sex is inherently bad. I think it's just, from his perspective, the way it is a thing that can be an addiction, and I think that's maybe part of his addiction. There is nothing about him cheating on his wife, which is kind of weird that never really comes up, but anyway, but yeah, so when he's trying to escape from that stuff, all he sees is the nightmare of his planet, which is really sad and messed up and makes him very sympathetic, and you can understand how he ends up in the place he ends up in this movie. It's also possible he just finds Earth so horrifying he'd rather be on his drought-ridden planet with the people who care about him and in a simpler place. And I've already kind of dealt with a lot of the rest of this. So going back to sex, sex is portrayed as a primal activity that replaces purpose. Newton loses himself in sex and is no longer focused on his goals for a while. Bryce loses interest in sex once he has a sense of purpose in Newton's company. Of course, he's still going to show darker colors later because all four of our major characters in this movie show the worst sides of themselves by the end. Another thing the movie is about, Earth is not the center of the universe, and it's arrogant to assume we're the only intelligent life in it. There's a line he has to Bryce where he says, because he's talking about visitors, and Bryce is like, what do you mean? There have been aliens on the planet? And he says, there have always been visitors. Like I said, there's a lot more big science fiction ideas here than I realized on first viewing. The idea is we might not all be that different. Humanity might be a universal constant, but it's not because Earth is the center of the universe. We and Newton's people, after all need water, and they probably have a lot of the same contradictions and strengths and flaws that we have. And that is indicated by the last scene, which I'm not sure how I feel about the ending overall, but I really like the exchange that Newton and Bryce have at the end. When Newton says, because Bryce is wondering why he doesn't seem more jaded and, holding Bryce to contempt for what he's done to him by the end. Because he clearly, I don't know how much, but he clearly had some sort of a hand in I assume, in the kidnapping plot and Newton not going to space and being experimented on. So Newton says, well, we'd have probably treated you the same if you came over to our place. And then it's right after that he says, you must know there's always a chance. With science, there's always a chance. It's a little bit ambiguous as to what he's talking about there, whether he's talking about... My read on it, from my synopsis earlier, was that it's kind of two things. That it's about the, pardon me, I was just wondering, because there's a thing I want to talk about, and I'm not seeing my notes on it here, so hopefully I get to it here in a minute, and don't forget to bring it up. But anyway, my read with my synopsis was that that line at the end is kind of about a couple of things, that that his planet might still be saved, but also that humanity ultimately can be less petty and do the altruistic thing and not be all about the individual. This is, of course, a very post-Vietnam movie. It's another bleak 70s movie taking a hard look at societal decay and corruption, and it's really experimental. Like a lot of movies like this, it doesn't seem afraid of any rules at all, or breaking them. Here it is. So, at first I thought the title was kind of inaccurate, and I wasn't sure what it was getting at. After all, our protagonist doesn't really fall to Earth. Like, he goes there on purpose, and the main character's name also seems related to that idea, Newton. It's about falling, the law of gravity. But then I realized, oh yeah, he does fall, just not literally. Well, I guess he does literally, because he does crash, so in that way he falls. I'm not sure why his spaceship doesn't work at the end there, but he lowers himself to the dregs of society. He becomes too human. He falls to Earth to his lowest point by becoming an Earthling, and he falls apart. So that's great. I actually really like that title now. I like and I'll get to some comments here after a little bit, guys. Wow, already almost at an hour. I have a time displacement thing when I do this show. This is like, going to light speed and then just dropping off someplace. I'm aging at a different rate than everybody else right now. I like the seemingly generic name of Newton's company, World Enterprises. I might be reading too much into that name, but I think it's all there in the piece, even if it's not really intended. World Enterprises, it says his motivation and his downfall in the name of his business, both. He wants to use our world to save his world, and he can't do it because he becomes too worldly. So that's really good. Like I said, I realized that this is in 3 acts. I'll go ahead and tack this in here. It is 2.5, almost 2.5 hours. I think it's too long. It's missing things, but there's also scenes that go on a lot longer than they need to. I think this needs to be somewhere between 1 hour 45 and 2 hours without seeing the rest of the footage. But it's not as meandery as I thought, or at least in its structure. It still watches somewhat meandery, especially in the 3rd act. But I'll break down our plot points. 1st act plot point. And there are 2 of them because each of them is like a personal relationship thing and the larger mission that Newton is on. So we'll start with the personal stuff. So 1st act plot point, Newton gets serious with a girl, and also he decides to build a spaceship. Those are related things. We'll talk about that later. 2nd act plot point, Newton and his girlfriend break up. Newton tries to launch his ship and gets kidnapped. And 3rd act plot point, Newton tries to get back together with his girlfriend, but they decide they don't love each other. And Newton's kidnappers ignore him, he leaves, and he gives up on getting home. Okay, let me see what some folks are saying in the comments here, and then I'll break down our 4 major characters here. Neil Davis, part of the music was done by John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas fame. Yes, I did read that. And there wasn't a lot of like the rock music in this that really grabbed me, that I really appreciated. It seemed a lot of it kind of like bizarre for the sake of itself, and some of it's, I like the quirky jazz in it. Like the jazz stuff I like better than the rock stuff in the score, but I wish it had a little bit more of a cohesive sound. Newton, we have a problem, says Daniel Davis. That's great. Unknown Passenger, fascinating take. I'll have to rewatch it to be totally sure. He's probably talking about that whole TV read I had. And I might just be totally full of something and BS, and I don't know. Maybe I'm on something right now. No, I'm not. Maybe when I'm drinking, I end up going back to my home planet. No, I'm just like Newton. It's just water for me tonight. Unknown passenger, I had not heard this. He says Annie had to cut back on his drug usage at the time so Roeg could actually direct him. But the way everybody that I read talks about this movie, even though he was on a drug trip the whole time, apparently he was not difficult to work with at all, and everybody really liked dealing with him, and he was clearly giving a fantastic performance. I love him in this movie. I think he's great. Daniel Davis, hey Cap, what is your favorite science fiction film from the 1970s? Right off the top of my head, it's probably Planet of the Apes, the original, although Beneath is fascinating. Anyway, let's get into character motivations and worldviews, and feel free to keep throwing in comments, the few of you guys that know this movie and are here right now, and I know it's real late on a Monday night, but thank you guys for hanging out with me. We're already in an hour. It's crazy. I'm hoping my voice holds up. Okay. We start with Newton, of course. We're going to talk primarily about each character's relationship to humanity at large and how they feel about humanity and if they believe in it. So Newton is eventually self-destructive and wants to escape from the oppressive climate, literal climate of his planet, but he ends up doing that in a different oppressive social climate. So he just keeps jumping back and forth, like I said. He can't find peace, and he loses his sense of purpose. He can't reconcile the traumas of everyday life like so many regular Earthlings. So he wants to believe in humanity, but he ends up becoming one of us and then not believing even in himself. He tragically gives in to humanity, finds he can't trust it, though he never entirely gives up on it either, if my read is the correct one at the end. And I think it's a little bit ambiguous, so I say if it's the correct one, there may not be a correct answer with what he's talking about at the end. Nathan Bryce, every single character is tragic, by the way. Thinks he already understands humanity and believes in it, which sounds great, but it ends up being dangerous because it's the reason that he ends up kind of playing Judas to Newton's Jesus. He worries that we're relying too much on technology and losing our humanity by forgetting that innovation comes not from perfection, but from our flaws. I rarely have related to and appreciated the philosophy so much of a character that ends up being pretty detestable by the end. We progress through overcoming hardship. It's humanity's quest for perfection that makes it what it is, and achieving that would ruin us. I think I kind of already said that. That was kind of redundant on my part. That was a little overwritten. That was a little Alex Kurtzman. They're taking, this is a line he has, they're taking our computers and installing people back to man and his imagination. He calls himself a cliché. The disillusioned scientist goes with the spaced out spaceman, which is foreshadowing because we'll find out, or he'll find out, of course, later that Newton is, in fact, a spaced out spaceman. His philosophy suggests why mankind might be losing its humanity, and that brings up another contradiction, by the way, that we create incredible innovation through hardship, and that's what's special about us as a species. But then we make ourselves too comfortable with those innovations, and we rely on them too much, because a lot of good science fiction, of course, is about over-reliance on technology, and then it makes us lose the drive that led us to make those things in the first place. That's the difference between something like this and Star Trek, where Star Trek has that optimistic idea that in the future we'll create all these things that will save us, and then we will stop caring about the acquisition of things for ourselves, and we'll continue on innovating. A movie like this suggests that may not quite be in the human condition, or maybe, but it's like a slim hope. So that whole idea never quite comes together well enough with the rest of the ideas in this movie. I don't think, at least on two viewings, mainly because I don't know enough about Newton's planet and the drought. Like, did that whole thing happen to them already? The thing with innovation, that they went as far as they could and then they got complacent and then it ruined them? Or did they somehow avoid that happening to them, that part of the human condition, even with their incredible achievements? And if so, why the drought? We don't know. I really expected at some point for Newton to come out and say, we destroyed ourselves on my planet. I was hoping I would come here and you would be better than us. And it turns out you're not. And we're never given that. I don't really know enough about what happened to his people for that whole theme to fit in with the rest of it and come full circle by the end. And then his girlfriend, Mary Lou, is looking for anything outside of humanity to believe in. She doesn't believe in people. She's looking for something larger and noble, which is why she goes to church. She's also really curious about the universe and science. She doesn't seem to know much about it, but she likes to look at microscopes and telescopes. She wants to understand Newton, thinking that could give her life meaning. And then we have Farnsworth, who is, if you'll remember, if you've seen the movie, the guy at the beginning that is the lawyer, the patent lawyer, that helps Newton build his company. He's looking for meaning not in people, but in social stature. And that, of course, is really going to bite Newton later on, feeling important because he's part of a powerful company. It's why he gives up personal leadership to be Newton's number 2, and it's why, like with the other two characters, he also ends up turning against the protagonist by the end. Let's see what else folks are saying in the comments here. I am caught up already, it looks like. So I'm just going to keep moving on then. And like I said, feel free to ask me anything you want to about this movie. I'm going to break down things I liked and things I didn't care for now that I have done, I want to say, some basic analysis. We've already gotten pretty in-depth here, I think. Okay, so just going kind of linearly, stuff I really like in this movie. We have a quirky jazz score that's sometimes effective. It's a mixed bag, like I said. Bowie's disturbed, confused, despondent performance. It's really vulnerable. And even though it's one of those performances where he's supposed to be an alien, but he's the most human person in the movie, even though he also totally loses himself. The makeup in this movie is really good. Bowie looks alien and pale, and it always looks like there's something under his skin. And also making everybody gradually age looks pretty good as well. Particularly with Rip Torn. And I'll talk about that in a second. Symbolism and cinematography. Images that foreshadow or reflect major ideas. Like, there's a moment toward the very beginning where Newton winds up outside a flea market. I wrote pawn shop, but it's not a pawn shop. The lady that runs it even says it's not a pawn shop. But anyway, there's a sign in the window that says radios and TVs, and of course, that's setting up a huge thematic idea in the film. Austin, I'm doing a rewind. Leave me alone. Okay, so I also really liked Rip Torn's performance. Oh, something else I was going to say about that whole thing. One of the scenes and again, I only watched the first episode, that the new man that came from Earth, it's so weird even saying that this exists, but one of the things that it does is it kind of recreates a lot of scenes and just makes them way more outlandish. So we find out at the beginning of this that Newton has a whole bunch of wedding rings that he somehow got his hands on, and he's been taking them to, I guess, different shops and getting money for them. And I don't remember the character's name, but Chuldo Editfor, he does the exact same thing. I don't know why you do the same thing. Like, did he get it from, because the other guy was his mentor. Did he get it from his mentor, who he hasn't seen in 40-something years? Or however time works, between the planets. Like, spoiler alert, but he's actually in the show, but played by another actor. And it's Bill Nighy, which was kind of a strange choice. Like, wow, we need an old British guy. Okay, I'm jumping around, but I just remembered this. Maybe there's an explanation in the show. I don't know why Bill Nighy's version of Newton looks so old, because he hasn't been aging in this, and like a bunch of decades pass and he's the same age. But now it's like he started aging from the moment this movie ended up to now, and now he looks like he's in his 80s or something. I don't know. Maybe there's some kind of explanation for that, but you could have just said that he continued to not age or didn't age much, and cast somebody that was in their 50s or something. I don't know. I have no idea what's going on there. But anyway, so Edget 4's character takes a bunch of wedding rings into a pawn shop, or maybe it's also a flea market, I'm not sure, and because it's the same scene, and throws them all over a counter and screams at her and is like, give me the current market rate. And I'm not really sure how he got market rate. I don't know where he got that term from. Maybe he got it from a radio, because apparently these characters have a sense where they either have really good hearing or they can pick up radio transmissions, and I'm not sure why, and that's a big question I have with this movie, because it's never explained and I don't know where that came from. Although maybe the idea is that it's not their technology that made it so that they could see Earth television. Maybe they just picked it up in their heads. I actually didn't really think of that. Maybe that's what's going on with that. I'm not sure. But I still don't know why they have that. Anyway, I mean, maybe it's just a superpower they have from the planet they're on. But it's kind of a weird superpower. I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on there. But anyway, yeah, he throws just all the rings on the counter. And I'm like, yeah, we got to do every scene, but way bigger. But then the lady that runs the place does have kind of a fun line there, because it's one of the better pieces of writing in the episode, I guess, where she says, I never had much luck at the altar either. That's pretty good. Anyway, let's talk about more things I liked in this movie. Rip Torn's performance. It's uncanny how close he gets to an old man version of himself at the end, just thinner. I kind of mentioned that at the beginning, but it's crazy. They give him a beard that looks a lot like his beard in things he has like in the 90s and 2000s. He's one of those guys that really got more distinguished with age, like Jeff Bridges, and he kind of looks like an older Jeff Bridges at the end of this. But I also think that those two actors look similar young, too. Like, if you look at Jeff Bridges in Tron, and then you look at Rip Torn in this, they could almost be brothers, I think. But yeah, I get to the end of this movie, and all I could imagine was him saying, "We're not hosting an intergalactic kegger." The black hat look for Bowie is really iconic, and of course, naturally, the TV show has to immediately have him wearing that, because of course he wouldn't be wearing anything else. He's got to be wearing the thing he's wearing at the very end of the movie. It's iconic. Yeah, I'm spoiling things from that pilot. I'm sure I'm making you want to watch it. There is a good foreshadowing at the beginning for Newton making a record later, when Farnsworth asks him if he wants to put a record on when he's at his apartment. That's pretty good. Wouldn't it be nice if at the end, when we get the record, we got to hear the song? I mean, maybe it's not so nice because it wouldn't have been Bowie, but man, when Rip Torn goes to Bryce, I was trying to remember his name, when Bryce goes to the record store and grabs that record and is like, can I listen to this song? It's really weird that we don't hear the song. And I find myself imagining it's not even music. Like, it's just him talking in a weird alien language, and for some reason the kids are all listening to that, even though he just made it so he could send a message into space. But, like, it's got to get on the radio. He's also really lucky that he was able to get a record label to pick him up. Like, he doesn't play music or anything in this entire movie. And then at the end, I guess just because he's David Bowie. Like, I wonder if that would have been a plot point if anybody else had played him. If it's just because he's Bowie. Because you go to a record store at the end and you're like, oh, that's a fitting place to end your movie, setting for the end of your film, just because your actor is David Bowie. But I wonder if that would have been there. Anyway, so it's really weird that we don't hear that song, because it would have to be music, or it wouldn't get on the radio. Is it just like, he's got a lot of money, so somehow he can, like, force a song to be top 40 and get on the radio? It's not really how that works. The setup is really intriguing and grabbed my attention right away, and then about an hour in, the movie really lost me. On a second viewing, it didn't lose me until the last half hour, so that's good. When Farnsworth says you have 9 basic patterns, I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. What are they all going to be? We only get, I think, like 3 of them. There's only a couple that I was totally sure about. There's the Kodak camera thing, or the camera that competes with Kodak, where it's even better than a what do you call that? The kind of instant cameras that we had when I was a kid, like in the late 80s, early 90s. And then, but like this is like way clearer than that. You don't have to wait for the film to develop. And all of that. Why can't I think of what that's called right now? But then there's also like a music player that seemed really futuristic. Kind of looked a little bit futuristic even now, honestly, because I don't have any idea how it works. But it made me wish that the focus was more on how Newton manipulates business and changes technology. So yeah, just what are those other patterns? I like the early signs that Newton is already Polaroid. That's what it is. It's a Polaroid camera. I like the early signs that Newton is already becoming accustomed to the self-centered way a lot of people do business. Offers to let Newton buy his sound equipment at cost rather than giving it to him, even with his generous salary. And that's a really important line from Farnsworth when he says, "Perhaps you're not so different after all, Mr. Newton. Has he changed since he got here, or is he human in the first place?" is one of the big questions in the movie. I like the scene where Bryce gets fired and kind of quits all at the same time at the college and gives his speech about how kids are bored and need ideas to pursue. Again, really gets me on his side, and then at the end, he does something horrible. It might have been a better way to introduce him than the way we get him, though, because there's a point where there's kind of too many characters that I'm not sure what they're doing on screen yet, and it makes me lose track of things, especially because some of what we're getting is as cryptic as it is. So he's introduced on campus. He's a womanizer. He's sleeping with his students, and then we get that scene where suddenly he's not interested in that anymore. I actually don't know, because he's not the protagonist of the piece, I don't know that I wouldn't have understood what was going on with the co-eds and all of that if we just gotten that as his introductory scene in the first place. I like the prophetic way Newton meets Mary Lou. This is a thing I didn't think of until a second viewing. She doesn't understand him and hurts him immediately on the elevator because of his motion sickness. And so she like physically gets him high, which leads him to his fall. It does a nice job establishing Newton's naive worldview before he descends into self-destruction. So there's a lot of really great subtext in this movie. It's really nice writing that I didn't appreciate initially. There's this bit where Betty Lou is with him in the hotel, and she says, this is, and I like how nonchalant she is about it. She's like, oh, this is a very unhealthy place, just really matter of fact. This place is unhealthy. Newton's response is, I just think it takes some getting used to, is all. And that's not about the hotel. That's about planet Earth. Really good subtext. Bowie and Candy Clark, who plays Betty Lou, have an immediate cute chemistry together. They have a wonderful evolution of their arc until you get to a point where there's just a light switch and suddenly he's being really mean to her. And that's a place where I feel like you can really see the scenes that are missing. I would be shocked if there's not any there. It should feel more tragic when their relationship falls apart because that kind of comes out of nowhere. But I do like how she seems kind of like his Adrian to his Rocky. Shy and uncertain, gets more mature as their relationship grows, then it falls apart and she degenerates into a child. I think I could have even done a whole, because I kind of did a parallel to this and biopics about rock musicians that have the fall from grace. I think you could do the same thing as like a Twisted Rocky also. I like all the choices of TV programs Newton is watching and how they relate to what he's going through. And not just him. There's other places where people are watching TV shows and movies, and they always uh, enhance the scene in some way and are speaking to specifically what's happening, and not just in kind of reiterating what's happening in kind of a jokey kind of way. But that's a really artistic thing that I always appreciate when it's done well, and it happens over and over in this. I like the connections made between Earth things and Newton's planet, like the train reminding him of the vehicle he has on his planet. I just want more of that and earlier. I also don't understand what that vehicle is. I can't figure out if that's taking him to his spaceship or if somehow it is his spaceship. That was also a question Roger Ebert had. I read his review and he said that too. And I was like, yeah, like, is that... It's on a track and it reminds him of a train. But then, like, where's he going? I mean, I guess it's probably one of those things where it's just, we have a limited budget. We're going to go shoot in the desert. This is all you get. But I needed some kind of matte painting or something with a little bit more society. Or make it somehow clearer that that's all there is. But it would be really weird if that's all there was. I like that the moment Newton finally decides to get his head back in the game and go to space, to go to his home, is when he starts talking to Mary Lou about building a home. You have tested loyalties to his two respective homes. I like Mary Lou's initial horrified response to Newton's alien body. It just seems really natural and believable to me. Then she tries to come back to him and sleep with him after the shock, but like she still can't deal with it. And like I said, it feels real and it's tragic, and it was a lot sadder on a second viewing, especially you get past that and it looks like maybe they can sort of patch it up, and then she's so distraught and turns into like a 3-year-old having a tantrum when he's going to go to space. And then when he doesn't go to space and she's kind of she's not part of that whole plot, but she's complicit a little bit because she goes and visits him and is part of that scheme a little bit and trying to get him to do what the agents or whoever they are want him to do. Because I can't tell how much of that is government and how much of it is the rival corporation, and I have no idea what's going on at the end. But then they have that heated moment where they decide they don't love each other anymore. Kind of get you right there. I like the intercutting of, I don't like this scene, or I can't decide how I feel about it on a second viewing. I still don't think I like it. But anyway, but I do like the way it's edited. The intercutting of the messed up gun shooting scene, you know, the weird sex scene. Where it's so weird talking about this kind of thing on this channel. Thanks, Jeffrey. You got the gun shooting blanks, the sex scene. It's intercut with their innocent first night together. Just turns that knife if you care about this relationship. Okay, bad stuff. Some of this you've heard before. The soundtrack is not David Bowie. That's unfortunate. It's too long and it's missing important scenes. There's not enough reaction shots toward the beginning of Bowie when things are supposed to seem weird and alien. So on a first viewing, I'm not appreciating what I'm supposed to get from those scenes. I really think the message of this movie is driven home better if, like I said earlier, Bowie is treated like the eyes-in character of a movie made for the aliens' home planet. Even though it establishes the surreal tone right away, it also marches forward enough like a more typical drama in the first 20 minutes that it's really jarring when it stops doing that. So, again, more first viewing than second viewing, but I was like, oh, we're degenerating into a lot of like really long sex scenes for no good reason. I'm starting to appreciate thematically why some of that is there, but I still think some of it should be cut down. So I mentioned an intercutting choice that I liked a lot, but there are several I don't. Weird intercutting between scenes that are supposed to make me uncomfortable and disoriented, but then also detract from the story being told. So we introduced Nathan Bryce on campus. I talked about that earlier and suggested maybe that should be gone. Part of it's because of the way it's edited. So we established that he misses his family, and that's good. But then we immediately jump back and forth between him having strange fetish sex with one of the co-ed, actually two of the co-eds. That was confusing too, where it's like, here's this girl, and then he's also in bed with this other girl. And then there's this third thing that we're cutting between, which is Newton watching at a restaurant an Asian sword demonstration. And I get what it's doing thematically. There's a whole phallic thing with that, and it's like the ways in which sex can be violent, and there's domination. It's carnal and animalistic, and again, phallic symbol, sword penetrating the skin, all of that. But like, what is it saying we're doing for Newton? Like what is it saying about him or to him? Because that kind of weirdness only really works if the point is making things that we're familiar with already seem alien and weird to us now. If Newton's not watching those things, it's just a human being like us that's having, weird kinky sex, but having sex with a couple different women at different times. So if he's not seeing that happen, and it would be weird if he was there, don't get me wrong, I don't really know what the point is. Like, if he was there watching people having sex, I could see him responding like it's violent. We get it the other way. And I don't really understand that. I don't know that that makes a whole lot of sense. He gets up and leaves because the violence makes him uncomfortable. Sure, but what does that have to do with the sex scene from his perspective? So there's some POV issues, I think. And then there's another scene where we intercut between... Oh, you know what? I'm actually conflating it. Sorry. There's a lot of stuff with different characters having sex. That wasn't the two co-eds with Bryce. That was another scene with Bryce having sex, I think, because there's two of them. Yeah, that's what it is. So then later we have the two at the same time, and Newton recovering from his blackout in the elevator, and that one is just confusing because I'm trying to keep track of everything. I'm having a hard time with that right now, obviously. Anyway, once again, there's a story connection, but I don't really understand that choice because it kind of throws the viewer off. There's one inconsistent and careless storytelling device I didn't really care for in this movie that isn't there for 21 minutes, and then we do it a few times, and then we never see it again. 21 minutes in, Farnsworth gets a voiceover about how his life has changed and he likes it with working for Newton, despite not being his own boss anymore. But it's not in any kind of scene, and he's not talking to anyone. It doesn't sound like it's in his head. It sounds like he's having a conversation with somebody, and it's totally one-sided, but we don't have any context for setting or who he's talking to or anything. And then later on, Mary Lou does it, and Bryce does it right after that also. It happens 3 times. So if we're going to do that, it should be earlier in the movie, and then we should keep doing it with other characters. So it's weird. It's also very 70s. Couple of these things I've said already. Too many characters to follow when we're supposed to see the world through Newton's eyes, at least early on. I would like to see this movie as being entirely from Newton's POV, and he's in every scene. I think it would be more effective for the story it's trying to tell. It's odd that I'm made to think Mary Lou just helped Newton after the elevator. This is really minor, but I'll mention it anyway. And isn't coming back to just then jump forward in time and she's back again. That's another place where it seems like there's a scene missing. I'm going to skip around a little bit. Okay, I don't mind the nudity, I get the period of time we're in, the kind of story this is telling, and this movie's not going to shy away from sexuality. It's also about, human kind of, primal instinct and stuff, so I get that we're going to show a lot. But some of those scenes just go on too long and borders a little bit on softcore. And if I was an adult in the 1970s, I don't know if I would feel that way as much about it. So that might be modern sensibilities creeping in. I'm not sure. There is that light switch moment I mentioned earlier where suddenly the couple is not getting along, and it's also in the middle of a montage, which makes it weirder. It just seems lazy to not build gradually to that because we've evolved the relationship so naturally before that. I think the first hour is solid, and in some ways it goes downhill after that. There's some weird jarring edits, but that's also a very 70s kind of thing. And then there's this guy, Mr. Peters, the black man who works for the rival company that's trying to do a hostile takeover, I think, with World Enterprises, who, by the way, I know from a pretty decent Deep Space Nine two-parter where he plays one of the members of the Maquis, Cal Hudson. His name is Bernie Casey, that actor. I like him a lot. I've seen him in a couple other things as well. He didn't age at all from this movie to like 1993 or 4 when he was, probably 92, when he played Cal Hudson. But anyway, he just gets kind of dropped in out of nowhere, and it seems like he was probably in a scene before that. Okay, this movie is all about the imagery, so I feel like I should bring up images that stuck with me. Farnsworth with his giant eyes through bifocals. Newton and Mary Lou staring at each other in side profile and then into the lens like album covers. They both look like album covers. Maybe suggesting that they're aligned now, but may not always be. I'm not totally sure I have a good read on what the symbolism is for that, but that's an idea. By the way, apparently, I didn't look them up. There are a couple of Bowie album covers that are taken from this movie, and I don't know if either of them are that, but those would make great album covers. Newton on his home planet, standing next to the vehicle in the desert, that keeps coming up, and it's kind of a weird design for that train thing. And that stuck with me. Shot of Bowie in the double mirror just before he takes his human contacts out. If you go look up blogs and reviews of this movie, that's usually the screenshot that you see. And then right after that, the first shot of him with his yellow eyes behind the bedroom door is a great shot. It's very Twilight Zone-y. Reminds me a little bit of the Thriller music video. Those horrible yellow eyes! That shot of Newton on his planet, looking directly into the lens, wearing his water suit, it's shot from kind of beneath him, kind of up. Also looks like an album cover. Farnsworth's body in free fall when he gets thrown out of a window. I can't unsee that now. And Newton's family dead on his home planet is really sad and provocative, and I'm pretty sure that's what's going on there. Okay, let me check comments, see if anybody's saying anything else. Unknown Passenger, I think this concept could have made a great series, but unfortunately, Alex Kurtzman. Yup, I feel the same way. Unknown Passenger, the Low album really feels like the album Newton would make. I agree, and it would be so great if we could get a version of this movie with that as the soundtrack. Unknown Passenger, I never thought I would hear Cap say kinky sex on the channel. Yeah, this is turning into kind of an After Dark sort of review, but it was requested, and I don't review on Patreon. I have to do that here, so, maybe I should put a disclaimer in the title. I don't know. Unknown Passenger, yeah, movies aren't edited like this anymore, which I think is unfortunate for the most part. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the editing in this is kind of unnecessarily weird for its own sake, but some of it I do really appreciate, and like at the end of the day, the real problem is just so many things are kind of edited sort of stock now. Unknown Passenger, the albums that use imagery from this movie are Station to Station and Low. Yeah, I did see the Low album cover, but I did not look up Station to Station. Okay, finally, last thing I'm going to do before we get to rating is questions. So, once again, some of these will probably have answers and I just didn't figure them out. And some of them don't have answers, and some of that's intentional, and some of it is intentional and I don't think should be. I think we should have explicit answers for some of this. So not every question I'm asking here is a criticism, but just things that I wondered about. Here we go. How does Newton get a passport at the beginning? It has his face. Maybe he stole it from someone and then made his face look like him. I guess that's why he pretends to be British. Where did he get that ring? Probably the same person. Well, no, we don't know it was from the same person because it has the it has the initials engraved in it. But we're not told what happened. So, like, I'm assuming he didn't hurt anybody, right? I just don't know. I don't know what he did. Does some time pass, I asked this earlier, between Newton getting out of the water and going to the flea market. It watches like he comes out of the water and goes right there, but then he's already got the passport and glasses and everything. And he already knows that the glasses, like, will help his eyesight, too. So I don't know. Hey, did Futurama take the word Farmsworth for this movie? This guy also has huge bifocals, and that show knows it's obscure sci-fi movies. And every time he's in a scene with Newton, I could totally see him saying, "Good news, everyone." So, maybe so. Or maybe there is an explanation for that Futurama fans know that I'm not familiar with. But I think there's every possibility it came from this. Why does Newton get motion sick so easily? That's a big plot point with him, and it's kind of his kryptonite. Does it have something to do with gravity on Earth versus his own planet? He didn't have any trouble coming all the way to Earth on a spaceship, so I assume it has to have something to do with equilibrium on Earth, gravity, something. So I questioned whether Mary Lou, 'cause she's pretty small, could lift and carry Newton, because, like, Bowie's kind of a big guy. But then, like, they're filming the actress doing it, so maybe there doesn't seem to be any trickery involved. So I guess it's possible, because we watched it happen. I don't understand why Newton is hearing Bryce having sex with the college girls. Like it's on a distorted radio frequency. He doesn't know Bryce. Bryce hasn't gone seeking him out yet. There's not any reason that he should hear specifically Bryce. Like, I don't get it. I'm missing something. And again, a lot of these things are probably the stuff that people that know this movie better than me have thought about and can give me potential answers for. But I didn't understand that part. There's going to be a lot of that. Just, I don't understand this part. Unknown passenger, I can see that deep pull for Futurama. I think it's totally possible. How long do Newton's people live? I questioned that even a lot more after Kurtzman's first episode. How long did it take to travel from there to Earth? How long has the drought been going on? Newton seems even more messed up and ruined as a human being at the point where, if I'm seeing it right, we see his family dead on the planet because he wasted a lot of time and then finally got a spaceship just to go test being in space and then never tried it again and has just decided to stay back and makes I'm going to mention this earlier, makes an album to send a message to his wife. I don't know what that message is. Is it just a lot of lying? Like, I'll be back home soon. I didn't sleep with some other random woman on this planet. I still look like I always did. Don't worry, my yellow eyes aren't gone. I didn't get contact lenses fused to my eyes with X-rays. I wonder what was in that. But yeah, that's really messed up, right? That, like, he's playing that record and on radio stations, hoping that she'll hear it because they pick up radio frequencies. And she seems to be dead, as far as I can tell. I'm getting sad. I'm depressed. Why is Newton... okay, so this is weird. There's this bit where Newton is driving on a country road with his girlfriend, and then suddenly there's hillbillies in bluegrass. And they disappear, and then the car disappears. I have no idea what's happening. That's some of the trippy, surreal imagery where it doesn't seem to be anything literal actually happening. I don't know what's going on there. Does Newton actually have superpowers? We talked about that. Why are there so many seemingly random camera zooms that don't focus on anything that appears to be relevant? But then that's also a 70s thing? Is the spaceship designed intentionally to look like a TARDIS inside, like a tiny TARDIS? Because it kind of does. So there's that weird bit that I mentioned earlier where suddenly Newton is being, like, sadistic and mean to his girlfriend, and he's watching all the TVs and he's ignoring her and he's kind of laughing about it, and then he seems totally normal after that, except for the one bit where he goes to Bryce when he's outside, seemingly telepathically or something, and he says, "Don't be suspicious," and then Bryce blinks and then he's gone. And then the next day he says, don't be suspicious again. And he seems like he's catching himself because he knows he said that before. So, like, that definitely wasn't a hallucination. He really did that. That's part of his, like, frequency superpower thing, I guess, whatever that is. So that's a bit where he's acting kind of weird. I also don't know why he did that, except just, that seemed contrived. Because it seems like he does that just so that Bryce can get more confirmation of what he's already suspecting, which is that Newton is an alien. So I don't know why he did that. I guess he just needed the plot. He's writing the story and he needs the plot to progress. What is the point of the scene where the TV remote stops working? Like, is it not just radio frequencies? Does technology work for him whenever he's around it? Because he's got technology powers? I don't know what's going on there either. Why does the guy in the commercial look like Newton? Like Bryce asked him. Bryce is like, why does that guy in the commercial look like you? And like seconds before that, I'm like, hey, that's weird. Why is he in that commercial? I thought he would just say, I made that commercial. But he doesn't say that. He's just like, oh yeah, it kind of does. These feel like clues that are leading to something that I'm supposed to be understanding, but I've seen this movie twice and I still don't understand those things. And nobody in the comments is explaining that, any of these things yet, so I might not be the only one. But if any of these things made sense to you, tell me what you thought was happening. Why does Newton, or pardon me, what does Newton mean when he tells Mary Lou, if I stay here, I'll die? He's in a hurry now. He's like, I've got to get on the spaceship. I gotta build it. I gotta get on and I gotta leave. It suggests that he can't stay on Earth, but then he does stay on Earth. I don't know what he means by that. Does he mean like emotionally or something? Because it doesn't play that way. It plays like it's a reveal for something biological that's going on or something. But I don't know what's going on. Why does Newton... I got a bunch of these, so strap in, hang on tight. Why does Newton hit the tray and knock all the cookies all over the kitchen? I mean, I guess he's just mad because Mary Lou is making it difficult for him to leave. This is right before she learns that he's an alien. But just the way it's shot is so deliberate. It's in slow motion. He's just like, ugh! I guess that's just supposed to be like the moment that their domestic bliss is gone. But like it was already kind of messed up. I don't know. That seemed overly dramatic for no good reason. How does Newton's human bodysuit work, or this skin thing or whatever? I don't want to get too far into this. I don't want to get gross or anything. But just keep in mind that we have not just female nudity, but male nudity in this movie. And he had regular human male parts. And then he reveals that he's an alien, he has his yellow eyes, and then he is anatomically different. So I don't know how sex works exactly. And I assume he just has a really good human bodysuit. I don't know. And then later on he just has it again. I guess he put it back on. We don't really see how exactly that works. We're not supposed to think about these things. I'm going to skip a couple of these that are not as interesting. Why does Newton think to even ask for the gun with blanks to make Mary Lou think he's going to kill her? Like, I get it, he's at his lowest point, and like he's really kind of lost it at this point. But man, that is really messed up that he would just even think to do that. This is even a criticism. I'm just like, how does he come up with that? It's really weird. And I think it probably comes from this place of like, I could either commit suicide or give in to my primal instincts. I haven't decided which I'm going to do yet. But then like he asked for blanks. So I guess it's just like he's decided how far he's going to go, but now he's just playing and toying with her. But the bigger question is that how blanks work? Like, I didn't think you could shoot blanks at people at point blank range. I thought that point blank range, I thought that still hurt and could actually send you to the hospital. Like, they shoot each other in their ears. Am I wrong about this? I didn't think you could do that. Just a couple more. Why does Mary Lou seem to get more southern as she ages? And what is the point, this is the last one, of the space launch at the end, right before we get the shot of Newton's family, again, dead? I think they're dead on the planet. I think the point is probably just that we're still doing space shots, but we didn't let Newton go because of petty corporate espionage and or government control. But I'm not 100% sure if that's why. Unknown Passenger, a scene that has always stuck with me is where Bowie shoots Mary Lou. It seems really raw and uncomfortable to watch in a good way. It is, and it's shot really well. It's just everything about that is bizarre. And that felt, on first viewing, like a really self-indulgent scene where it's like, this is this wild montage. It's kind of out of nowhere. It seemed just like a really strange idea. And I think thematically I'm getting a lot more on a second viewing, but he seems by the end of the movie still to retain enough lucidity and humanity that it's crazy that he went that far, I think. But I'm more won over on it as I'm thinking about it and talking about it. Anyway, we only have one tweet-length review tonight because I forgot to ask for those until this morning, and of course a lot of our patrons and Rewind producers have probably not seen this movie, but those of you guys that are still we got 9 here right now, and those of you guys that are watching and listening to the podcast live, if you want to put one in, feel free, and I will read it. Don't forget to put in a score if you are so inclined, but I'll read the one that we have, and I alluded to some of these things earlier because I got some information out of this tweet-length review, and it's Unknown Passenger, who we keep also talking to in the comments here. So, Unknown Passenger, thank you for all of your interaction this evening. He says, it's a movie that deeply resonated with me in my teen years. While it's definitely not flawless, this would have messed me up as a teenager, I think. While it's definitely not flawless, there's the sense of alienation and detachment that very few movies do as effective for me. The most glaring flaw of the whole thing is the soundtrack. Yep, they should have used the soundtrack Bowie made for it instead. And I talked about this earlier. One of the tracks was released on his album Low. Oh, I see what you're saying. Not that the whole album Low was made for this movie, but that Subterraneans was and put on that album. Interesting. Which I highly recommend listening to on your own time. And I did, and it's spectacular. And it made me really want to listen to a lot more Bowie. So foreboding and ambient and atmospheric, and has a lot of really surprising choices that work. Kind of like this movie sometimes, but other times not so much. Like there's a lot of things that should be jarring that happen in that song that somehow totally work but shouldn't. It feels like it keeps breaking rules. Yeah, I love that. It's wonderful. Thank you for sharing it. Now I'm going to go to my rating. I usually do a bunch of other things right around here, but it is a requested review and not a rewind, so we're not going to rank today. We're just going to do my rating, and then I will let you know what I'm doing for next time, which will sort of be a superhero rewind. I'm going to give this a 2.5. I was kind of like last week with Lone Ranger, between a 2 and a 2.5, and it's too interesting and thought-provoking and thoughtful, especially in a lot of the subtext that I was talking about with some of the dialogue, to go lower than a 2.5. But it's too messy and is missing stuff, and I'm too confused about the third act to go any higher than that. So I'm going to go for a 2.5. Thanks again, Jeffrey, for making me watch this. I'm glad I did, and I never would have if it weren't for this review. So I'm sure you guys will hear me keep referencing this now, especially in kind of checking back in with these kinds of surreal movies and movies with a lot of cryptic stuff in them, because it ended up making a lot more sense than I thought it did. As always, I want to say thanks to our Patreons, all of them at every tier, but especially our Superhero Rewind producers. If you want to become a producer, you can do that at the $10 tier. That's patreon.com/geekvolution. That lets you interact with me in a Discord. We meet once a month talking about superhero movies and sometimes even watching them. We're going to be doing a watch through of the Batman. We're going to be doing a watch party, I should say, pardon me, on the 27th of this month. So just a couple weeks, week and a half. And so if you want to do that with us, 3 hours, strap in. It's going to be fun. It's going to be Saturday that week. You can become a patron there, and that also gives you several other perks. Sorry, I'm stalling here because I'm trying to get some information up. And one of those is you get your name read at the end of every Superhero Rewind, and I'm going to do that for all of our producers right now, including Blake, Chewbacca's lover, David Crabtree is back, Elliot Slater, Goofster123, Hot Soup, Jojira, Joshua Gulasano, Michael Martin, SS Jerry, Stone Gasman, Super Billy, The Day Ghost. What is he still doing here? Thomas Edgehill, Adam March, Checkers the Inventor, Damon Bugay, Jacob Schneider, Kareem Roberts, Michael Gulick, Miguel Rodriguez, Thorne Jones, Wendell Jones, no relation, and Zach. Thank you guys so much for the support. Really appreciate it. It makes it possible for me to make this my full-time job. And now I'm going to bid you farewell. My voice is going out, and I need to go to bed. But if you were watching live, I hope you had fun. And if you watched after the fact, I really appreciate you clicking on this podcast/video. Next time, I'm going to be doing another request because it's request month, and this is a very old request from a million years ago from the old Geeks United Club. Some of those I'm doing as requests, but the superhero movies I'm doing as rewinds, and this one was requested by Craig Lister years ago, and it's Donnie Darko, a movie that there's been a debate for, I want to say raging, but I don't know if anybody remembers this movie. This will be another obscure one that probably not a lot of people will pop in for, but I was going to have to do it at some point. So, and I'm kind of out of superhero movies after Lone Ranger. Well, I've got one more, but it's going to be a hard one, and I didn't want to have to do it right after this because this broke my brain. Anyway, so Donnie Darko is a movie from 2001 that people have said for years, and people still writing blogs. Like, I saw this one from like a year ago, as if it was the first time anybody thought of it. Donnie Darko is a great superhero movie. Here's why it's a superhero movie. Yeah, everybody says that. I haven't seen it since almost back then. I think I saw it for the first time in like 03, 04. No, it was like mid-2000s. It was like 06. And I haven't seen it since then. And I remember getting to the end of it, and my buddy that showed it to me was like, yeah, but he says it's a superhero movie. And I was like, no, it's not. So I'm wondering if after I watch it again, I will agree with the masses that claim it's a superhero movie, or if I will stick to my old guns, because that was 15 years ago, and I don't know how I feel about it now. Daniel Davis says Donnie Darko isn't obscure. I mean, probably not as much as this, but for like younger viewers, I bet a lot of people have no idea what that movie is. But yeah, I mean, I would say probably more obscure now than back then. But yeah, it was a pretty popular movie. It got a crappy sequel. I've never seen it, apparently. Unknown Passenger, but there's one important thing you forgot to mention. Bowie's awesome hair. That's true. He does have crazy good hair in this, and I don't think anybody else could pull off that color. Unknown Passenger says this was fun. I'm really glad that you enjoyed it. And he says a 3 for him. Daniel Davis gives it a 3 out of 4. And there's some ratings. Okay. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you again real soon. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be doing a Captain Logan show at 8 Central. We're going to be talking more about the crazy things happening at DC right now because we're still getting DC movies. And Warner's Discovery, Warner's Media, whatever the heck they're calling that merged company now. And so it's going to be like part 3 of our live show series on that because just things keep happening. So we're going to be talking about how that might affect the Batman. So pop in and we'll talk about all kinds of other things also. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again real soon. I was Captain Logan, and you guys go to bed. See you later, folks. Bye, everybody.